Hi, Sergio. I thought that this week what we could do is I would post a video that just explains what we're doing studying this week and also how to access the activities that I've set for you. Last week's activities were working with the digital notebook. I think it worked well, and most of the digital notebooks I've looked at seem to have accessed this well. So what I've done this week is we're going to continue with the digital notebook, but what I've done is I've combined the notebook with the PowerPoint lesson to let you work through it. Okay, so if we look here at the screen, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to you about what we're learning this week and how you would access the activities. So this week we're going to continue our study of Scottish society and culture during the First World War. And what we're looking at here is if the First World War is what historians call the first total war. And what we mean by that is that for the first time in world history, that if a country was at war, the civilians were primarily affected as well. And what we mean by that is the people who were left at home who were not fighting, the First World War dramatically changed their life. And last week, we looked at a particular way that it did that, and that is rationing. And rationing was all due to the fact that for the first time, the Germans' military were attacking British civilians by preventing food from coming in. And as a result, the Scottish public had to respond to keep the food that they needed to survive. So this week what we're doing is we're going to continue by looking at society and culture. We're going to look at something called the Defence of the Realm Act. Now, the Defence of the Realm Act was a piece of legislation passed by the government to allow for them to have control over the Scottish public and to make sure that they were working 100% towards the war effort to help the soldiers fighting out on the Western Front. So if we first have a look at this and we look at the learning intentions for this week. So what are we learning about? So we're going to learn about the Defence of the Realm Act. So what is the Defence of the Realm Act? You'll see it being referred to sometimes as DORA. It's a good acronym for helping us remember it. The laws and the restrictions that came in under DORA. The need for DORA to be introduced and reasons why people didn't like DORA. Okay? And what are we going to learn to do in terms of our skills? So we're going to write an appropriate response to the described question. We're going to look at how to fill the question also. So what's our success criteria? So you can describe at least 2 restrictions under DORA and can appropriately use the ARR structure for how to fill the questions. Okay, so why are we learning this? Why is it important for us to know about the Defence of the Realm Act? So generally, it often comes up in exams, in class tests and SQA examinations. This is good for us to think about this one. How to fill the questions are very frequent and we'll use them for different topics, and it gives you a better chance of doing well in these assessments. Specifically, why is DORA important for us to learn about? So DORA is important because DORA links closely with one of our later lessons that we'll look at, something called conscientious objectives. It's understanding how and why the government controls society helps us to see clearly how wars can impact everyday lives, and then be able to not just describe the laws, but explain why people didn't like them. It's important to prepare for exam questions. So the first task that we're going to look at just now is background to DORA. So what I've given you here is just what is the Defence of the Realm Act. We've got information here in these boxes that tells you what DORA is. So what you would use for that is you would use that information to complete the questions below on what is DORA. Okay, so what I've given you the question, and then I've given you the sentence starter after that, and you would type in DORA stands for Defence of the Realm Act, etc. Okay. The next question that we're going to do is I've uploaded a video clip. Now I've put in the video clip that take you to YouTube, so this should hopefully be easier for people to access. And what this is giving you a broad overview of what the Defence of the Realm Act was, why did the government pass it, what was included in this legislation, and what impact did this have. And to allow us to organise our notes, we're going to once again complete a Cornell note template. Now, Cornell note templates are good because it allows you to structure your notes. So what I suggest you do is you watch the video first. I think it's about a 5-minute clip. And you watch the video and you just take in what it says. Then after that, you would use that to complete the Cornell note template. So the first thing is in this section, write down bullet points of any key facts you hear in the video. So I would maybe aim for like a minimum of 5 key facts that you take from the video. Then once you've looked at your key facts, you would think, what are 3 to 5 questions that you could write that you could use your key notes to answer? So say, for example, you've written the date that DORA was passed in your keynote section. So what you would do is you would write what date was DORA passed on. Okay. Then finally, in summary, in this section, cover up the keynotes and questions. Write a paragraph about the video taught you without looking at your notes. So cover up those keynote sections and then write a summary about the video. Okay. Now the next section that we're going to look at is what rules were imposed under DORA. Okay. And the rules are important for us because we can see how this impacted everyone's life and about how people's lives changed as a result of the imposition of DORA. Okay, so what I've got is some information here for you about the rules imposed. And what you're going to do is you're going to use the information above to complete the questions below. So similar to the tasks that were previously completed. And next key feature under the law is that we can put our head under is this idea of secrecy. So Britain during the time of the First World War, there's a real concern over German spies infiltrated British society, listening to what people are speaking about and then passing that back to Germany so hopefully they can win the war. So as a result, the British government ban or restrict a number of activities that they're concerned that the German spies could use. So what I've got here for you is a number of different ones that were introduced. So for example, you can no longer buy binoculars. You can't use invisible ink when writing abroad. And what you might think is some of these things are a bit trivial, a bit silly. Why would they ban buying of binoculars? But they all had a particular reason, and that is what this next task is encouraging you to think about. So what we've got here is I've modelled some of this information for you. So on the left, you would talk about the law or the restriction that was brought in under secrecy. So if we look at talking about naval or military matters in public, but then what you want to think about is why was this done? Okay, so I've got here to stop people from accidentally giving away military secrets to the enemy. If you think about binoculars, it's to stop people from using these to spy on important military bases, etc. Trespass on railway lines or bridges, you might write to stop people from sabotaging these important resource transports. Okay, so that's what you're doing here. You're thinking about what is the law that was introduced and why was that law introduced? What was it trying to prevent the German spies from being able to do? The next section that's important to think about is productivity. The British government are very concerned that if the factories and industry at home aren't working as effectively as they possibly can, then the soldiers on the Western Front will struggle. So what we're talking about here is factories that are making boats, factories that are making weapons, factories that are making resources like uniforms, sandbags that the soldiers are using on the Western Front. So if they're not working as effectively as they can, then we're going to struggle to win this war against a very effective German nation. So as a result, they bring in a number of laws and restrictions that are designed to make the people working in the industries more productive, better, efficient at what they're doing. So what we find here is things like striking was outlawed, pub opening times were limited, British summertime was introduced, and again we're going to do a very similar activity. So you're going to take the law and the restriction. You're going to take the law and the restriction and the impact on why it was done. So what I've given is here, I've given you the impact here. So what you're going to do is try and match that up with the restriction. So if we think about something like British summertime, it was to increase production without increasing expense. Okay. The next section that we'll look at is munitions. What we mean by munitions is weapons. Weapons that the soldiers need to use when they fight on the Western Front. So what we find here is there's different information here about munitions. In 1915, there was a munitions shortage, something called the shell scandal, where there wasn't enough weapons being created to allow the soldiers to fight on the Western Front. So what, under the Defence of the Realm Act, it allowed the government to basically try and increase production. So what I've got down here is I've got some information. I've got some information for you, and then I've got some information. I'm going to answer these questions. Again, I've given you the question and I've given you the sentence starter to help you. So you just type this in and you'll submit this back as your digital notebook. The final aspect of DORA that's important for us is the idea of punishments. How are people punished when they break the rules? Okay, and what you'll find again is some questions and you're going to answer them. And the final activity is kind of linked to DORA here today, something called coded annotations. And what you'll see for the coded annotations is you're going to read a passage on the next slide, which is about the Defence of the Realm Act. And as you're reading it, what you're going to do is you're going to put these sort of symbols at the end. Okay, so we've got a question mark if you don't understand what this means. You've got new information. I don't believe this fact. I disagree with this. I'd like to know more about this. I think this is unimportant. I think this is important. This connects to something that I learned previously. So what we'll find here is you're going to read this. So if we take the first sentence, the two main themes included press censorship and taking of any land the government wanted. So I might want to think, well, I didn't know that. I think this fact's important. So I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to colour it in blue using the highlighting tool on the slides, and then I'm going to put a star at the end to symbolise that that's an important key fact. Okay, so you're just going to read through that and you're going to apply these symbols to demonstrate to me how much you comprehend the information that we've looked at. And the final task to kind of finish with DORA this week is we're going to work on our how fully described questions. Now, we've completed how fully described questions in class, but what I've given here is I've given you a sort of reminder on how you would complete this type of question. So if we look at the how fully described question, the how fully question asks you to decide if the source has completely covered the topic or not by showing what is in the source and then explaining what is not in the source. So there's two types, but we're looking at a how fully described question. To answer this question efficiently, we use the ARR structure. Now, we all know the ARR structure, but on the next slide, I've given you a reminder of this. Okay, so A stands for answer the question, make a judgment. So source A gives a partial description of. Then you must refer, so you're going to give three quotations that effectively answer the question. So you're going to say one thing source says is, quote, and then finally you're going to give three things that's missed out. Okay, so when you're attempting this question this week, what I would suggest you use is you're looking at this structure and making sure that your structure fits in when you're answering. Okay, so here's the quote, here's the source that we're going to do. I'm going to read through the source and I'm going to explain what it's asking you to do. So source A, the Defence of the Realm Act, DORA, was introduced in August 1914. It stated that no one was allowed to talk about the Navy or Army in public places. You were also not allowed to spread rumours about military matters. You could not trespass on railway lines. It stated that no one was allowed to talk about Navy or Army in public spaces. You were also not allowed to spread rumours about military matters. You could not trespass on railway lines or bridges, and it was added to as the war progressed and listed things that people were not allowed to do in wartime. In addition, British summertime was introduced to give more daylight hours on it for extra work. So the question that we have is how fully does source A describe the restrictions introduced under the Defence of the Realm Act? So what it's asking you to look at is what were the restrictions that were introduced on the Scottish public under the Defence of the Realm Act. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify three restrictions that this legislation introduced. So the first one, I'll give you the first one that stands out to myself. It stated that no one was allowed to talk about Navy or Army matters in public places. So you would take your quote, source A states, and then write that down. So you're looking for three in the quote and then three things it doesn't mention. And what you're going to do is you're going to write your answer in here form. Okay. And then finally, the final slide is for me to provide feedback. So the feedback that you're going to be assessed against this week is, can you describe at least two restrictions under DORA? And can you appropriately use the ARR format for how fully question? Okay. So I hope this goes okay this week. I'm hoping that this video provides you a wee bit of context about what we're talking about and a kind of introduction of what's been looking for the assessment.